What is good, Tesla family? It's Ray J back with another video. And in this one, I want to break down what's going on with Tesla, SPY, NVDA, the QQQ, and a couple of other tickers. I'm going to break down why tomorrow is going to be another important day as we have Jerome Powell giving another testimony in front of the Senate's committee. I'm also going to break down what's happening with earnings and the news affecting Tesla, as some big things just came out which are very, very important. But before I break things up, all this information, before I get into any more details, let me just mention a couple of things. I am firstly not a financial planner, so take nothing I say as financial advice. And also, if you guys can, please check out the Moomoo link, which is down below and in the description. If you sign up for Moomoo, the link down below, and deposit $100 into the account, you are guaranteed 5 free stocks. If you deposit $1,000, you're guaranteed up to 15 free stocks, and the offer ends very, very soon. Anyways, when it comes to Tesla, this thing is looking bearish thus far as Tesla's continuing to break its lows. Today it made another new low and did the same thing yesterday. And this thing is continuing to downtrend despite how the market held up today. But the question is Tesla going to continue to fall to even lower levels? How will SPY and the QQQ end up running? How could they affect Tesla? And what may Jerome Powell say for tomorrow to really affect the markets? So, just as a reminder, Jerome Powell spoke today in front of the House committee, and that was at 10 o'clock a.m. Now, for tomorrow, which is going to be Thursday, March 7th, okay, Jerome Powell is speaking again. But first, at 8:30 a.m. Eastern Standard Time, an hour before the market opens, we have a couple of pieces of data coming out. We first have the exports and imports data, which will give us the balance of trade, looking at how much of a difference we're seeing relative to before. And we also have initial jobless claims coming out. We want this to be between 215 and 217,000. So we'll see what this causes. That's an hour before the market opens at 8:30 a.m. And then after that, at 10 o'clock a.m. Eastern Standard Time, this is 30 minutes after the market opens, we have Jerome Powell giving another testimony. Instead of speaking in front of the House, he's going to be speaking in front of the Senate committee. And this is going to be very, very important. Now, so far, Jerome Powell has stated that the Fed is not ready to cut rates quite yet. The Fed has to continue to monitor the data and the situation. However, he also mentioned that the economy is in a strong place in his opinion, not my opinion, his opinion. And he basically said that there is work to be done. They have to continue to monitor the situation. But given the current forecasts, they're not really forecasting a recession as of right now. He did say it's possible that one could happen, but they're not too sure, and they have to continue to see more data. He also was asked about the soft landing. He said that right now, the Fed cannot truly say with 100% certainty, but right now, they're not really projecting a hard landing. They're projecting more of a soft landing based off the current data. But the reason why they're not as certain is because they need more data to make their claim, because interest rates, right, them being raised is still a very recent event, right? It takes months and months and months, even years for the economy to really, really, really see the effects of them. So be very, very careful with all this news coming out. So when Powell started talking about the economy, the market got a little pop. We saw the market push to the upwards direction before getting a rejection. So it is possible the market sees some volatility tomorrow based off what he says. So make sure you're prepared for that. After Powell is done, all the data that's left is very minor. We just have some bill auctions at 11:30, not to mention consumer credit change at 3 p.m., which is all very minor data. But the main two times to be looking for data are going to be 8:30 a.m., an hour before the market opens, and then also at 10 a.m. when Jerome Powell starts his testimony. Once again, in front of the Senate this time, the Senate's committee, that's going to be very, very important. He's going to be talking more about like banking, housing, and urban affairs, so we'll see how that goes. Anyways, with Jerome Powell, speaking again, sometimes unexpected things could happen, but there are other things I just want to talk about. For today, we just had some more earnings coming out. We just had Victoria's Secret and Inovio. Victoria's Secret actually met expectations in terms of EPS and revenue. Their EPS was about $2.58 per diluted share. That is aligned with the expectations, a little bit better. And their revenue was just barely at expectations at $2.08 billion. However, despite that, we actually saw the share price tank because they're forecasting weaker sales, unfortunately, and there's going to be some struggles in Q1 that they are talking about. They also mentioned that for the year ahead, for 2024 as a whole, they're forecasting about $6 billion for the year. Wall Street, excuse me, was expecting 6.19 billion, so they're below expectations, which is not the best of news. Now, on top of this, there's news coming out about Inovio Pharmaceuticals. They ended up meeting expectations at 25 million and also $1.10 per share for EPS. However, unfortunately, relative to what we saw in 2022 Q4, so that's the year before Q4 of 2023, they did about 54 million overall in revenue and about $2.61 per share. So now their earnings are still not as strong as before. There is a bit of a decline because of how our economy has shifted away from the pandemic, and it's still affecting them. Now, their overall guidance was not the strongest. It's just kind of so so. That's why the share price was kind of flat, didn't really do a whole lot from there. So, another question is what's happening for tomorrow? I forgot to mention this. Tomorrow, we have a big day for earnings, at least the biggest day of the week. We first have like Big Lots, Burlington, and a couple of retail coming out. But then after the market closes, we have Costco announcing its earnings. That's going to be one worth watching, in my opinion. It's one of the biggest ones for the week. So we'll see how that goes. That's coming out for tomorrow. Anyways, enough about earnings, enough about all this Jerome Powell talk. Let's talk about Tesla. How is Tesla looking? Tesla's launching the Model Y with just 2 seats as a smart business solution. I think this is a pretty good move. They're launching this configuration in France right now. It's just unveiled and it's aimed for businesses. Basically, you have 2 seats right here. I think there's a better picture right here. 2 seats in the front, and then the rest of this is just cargo space. And the thing that's good about that is there's about over 2,000 liters of storage capacity. The range is about 565 kilometers, and this is very, very good for commercial vehicle taxation. So, very, very good news for them. That's about 351 miles of range, which is what the estimates are showing. That is once again not bad whatsoever. And the range I think goes up because of less weight, but it could be determined by other factors too. But not bad whatsoever. This is something Tesla is basically announcing. It could come with only 2 or 3 seats for commercial purposes. That could be very, very useful. The country of France has a fleet of about 6.3 million commercial vehicles, by the way. So it's a good area for them to be launching this. So hopefully this works out very well for them. However, let's actually talk about the elephant in the room, and that's the bad news for Tesla. There's been a lot of bad news, if I'm going to be blunt with you. First and foremost, don't forget that 2 days ago, their sales in China were not the best for the month of February. The data came out Sunday night to about Monday morning. And Tesla started a very, very big sell off as a result of that. Now, why were Chinese sales down? As you guys know, there was Chinese New Year. There could also be some demand issues, so Tesla cut prices again. Then, after that, okay, the next day came, that was yesterday. There was a fire not too far from the Giga Berlin, which caused them to lose power and then hold production for a long time, losing an estimate of about close to hundreds of millions of euros, if not close to €1 billion, according to some reports. That was a bad news for Tesla, and the reports came out today talking about that. So all this bad news is still affecting Tesla, and then we got even more bad news as Morgan Stanley has cut Tesla's price target, saying that Tesla could even lose money this year. So right here, we actually had Morgan Stanley's Adam Jonas come out. He's cutting his price target from 345 before. So he's still a big bull on Tesla, but instead of going to 345, he thinks that it's going to go to 320 instead. And he is changing this view because of what he's seeing right now with the price cuts, the competition in China, and so many other factors because of current macroeconomic factors affecting Tesla. So that's something that he mentioned. On top of this, the news is just continuing to just scream. Tesla's not one of the 10 largest US companies for the first time in 13 years. Tesla's falling. Jeff Bezos is now more wealthy than Elon Musk. They love to just scream about that, and it's good for them. Let them do whatever they can to get those clicks. But the truth is, all this negative sentiment associated with Tesla right now is negatively affecting it too. And this is all part of a game because once this thing drops to lower levels, big money is going to start buying up those shares and then launch it right back up when people least expect it. But I'm getting a little ahead of myself. We're not seeing that quite yet on Tesla. Volume was about 108 million, slowing down just a little bit, which is why we saw a lot of sideways price action. And short volume is going up just a little bit at about 45%. On top of this, Morgan Stanley gave Tesla an overweight rating, which is not the worst, but there are other analysts out there that also cut Tesla's overall targets. On top of this, the price price ratio is falling as Tesla is showing lots of relative weakness compared to SPY and the QQQ. On top of this, Tesla also has about it's only green about 48% of the time on Thursdays. And we tend to see more volatility around 1 p.m. and also around 3 p.m. So we'll be watching to see how this thing ends up performing, but just know that Thursdays are not the best of days historically. So what's happening to Tesla? What do I think about the share price? The honest truth, guys, is that Tesla is still on a downtrend. I mean, if you just zoom out of this thing, it's been sinking 3 days in a row. And the issue with Tesla is anytime this thing makes an attempt to bounce, more bad news keeps on coming out and it keeps on smacking it back down. So for tomorrow, with Jerome Powell speaking, it is possible the market tries to pop here and there. So Tesla could see some pops, a retest of 177.6 or so. But because of the downtrend, it's going to likely reject and continue lower. especially if we get bad news, and especially because the overall market may actually pull back very, very soon. I'll talk about that in just a minute, but just know that this trend on Tesla is still bearish. We're still on a very, very big downtrend. We're not looking as strong as before, and Tesla has lost some critical supports at 180, which is not a great sign. So, with that being said, Tesla's trying to shuffle around this 175 area. Uh, there's no guarantee it holds this. This is where we have a decent support. So I do think it's going to try to like kind of bounce a little bit tomorrow, retest like 177.6, 178 in the morning, possibly when Jerome Powell is speaking. But then there is a risk of it actually losing 175 and sinking all the way down to 170, if not 168. And the reason for that is because the market may drag it down. And if this downtrend does perpetuate and kind of like adjust Tesla's algorithms, the downtrend is still very strong. So there's no sign of a true bounce quite yet. I also want to add that when you look at Tesla on, let's just look at the 4 hour time frame, it's still looking kind of weak right now. There's no sign of a true bounce yet. We also hit 173. And on the daily time frame, it's about to get a bearish cross in the daily PPO. So typically when that happens, we tend to see more selling. The majority of the time, that's what tends to happen. So there's going to be a risk of more selling for Tesla. Things are not looking good because of all this bad news. There's so much bad news, right? We went from lowered sales to a fire, this crazy thing that happened to Tesla. Tesla losing a lot of money in their Gigafactory because of that. There's a lot of fear that Tesla's not going to meet the Q1 earnings expectations. And now we're getting price cuts. So it's just bad news after bad news after bad news for the stock. And right now, although the volume is declining, we're nearing a bearish cross on the PPO, which tends to suggest downside is imminent. So there is going to be risk of 170 coming soon. Look for a little bounce, a little pop in the daytime with Powell, and then more potential downside from there. But with that being said, guys, I mean, I know it's sad that Tesla has these technicals, but it's not the end of the world. I'm still a believer in Tesla, and I know it will come back from all of this. But there is some risk of downside for the short term. How about for SPY? I want to show you guys some interesting things on SPY. When we look at SPY on in the 5 minute time frame and then zoom out, check this out, guys. There's a possible head and shoulders like structure that is developing. I have to zoom out all the way just to show you this. So right here, this is like a left shoulder. This is like a head. And we could be forming like a right shoulder right here to continue sinking to lower levels. We also have a gap to fill at 507. And the chart is showing some weakness there. The 4 hour is also showing some weakness as SPY has failed to break this high. But let me give you guys one heads up about this trend. Although SPY is looking like it may sink, let me just call out something. So there is always a bullish and a bearish case. Let me show you what you should be watching for before I break down my opinion. So if you're bullish on SPY, and this is what I want you guys to watch for tomorrow, especially when Jerome Powell speaks, can SPY try to break this high right here? So right here, we had 514 as our top. We came down, we established a lower high, and we're starting to form a potential downtrend. However, if we get a bounce and we break past 512 to 512.5, this thing is going to likely retest the high and we could turn back to bullish. So if we break the high from yesterday, we're bullish. But at the same time, if we break the low from yesterday, if we lose 508.5, let's just say something happens after Jerome Powell gives his speech and we start sinking, we're going to likely sink down to 505, if not all the way down to 502. So if we lose 508.5, we're bearish. If we break past 512 to 512.5, we're bullish. What do I think this is telling us? Well, honestly, guys, it looks like we established a high. We failed to break the high. We made a lower high. And this is starting to turn. There could be a little pop here and there thanks to Jerome Powell giving his testimony, but the odds do favor this coming down to fill its gap to at least 507 very soon over the next couple of days. And eventually, if that doesn't hold us, 505 should be coming next. So I do see a risk of some downside on SPY. I do favor that slightly more. So that's what I am predicting, but we might pop in the morning, though. We could see some pops here and there thanks to Jerome Powell's testimony in the beginning, but the selling could come later on. That's what the chart is suggesting. I could change my opinion if we break 512, but I don't see that being very probable. So I do favor the downside slightly more. Onto the QQQ, I'm seeing the same thing. We failed to break this high at 446. We established a lower high at 442. To be bullish, we have to break 442, and then we could push up to 444. To be bearish, you want to see it lose 438 and eventually hit 436. If that fails us, we could sink all the way down to 432 and then start filling our gap below. Overall, with this head and shoulders like structure, I think we could pop here and there thanks to Jerome Powell. But ultimately, I do see us coming down to fill this gap to at least 436, if not below that. And we could start sinking to 434, even lower levels. This is looking kind of bearish. If we end up coming all the way down to 434, this could also be forming kind of like a head and shoulders, if not maybe even like inverse cup and handle. So there's going to be a risk of more downside. What else could contribute to the downside is going to be NVIDIA. NVIDIA has been trying to push. It has some tight resistance at 900. If we break past 900, we could see 908. But if we fail to do so and we end up losing 877, a bigger drop is going to come all the way down to fill this gap at 857. I think that NVIDIA has some tight resistance at 900. We could pop here and there thanks to Powell to test it, but ultimately I do think it's going to come down to at least 872. So look for a little pop and drop on NVIDIA. For Apple stock, we're not looking too great either. Apple was trying. It was trying to bounce. It wanted to push back up to 172, but it failed. It failed miserably, and now it's sinking back down. We even lost 169. So, in my opinion, it might shuffle. It might push back to either 169 to 170. One of these two shuffle a little bit, but ultimately I do see 168 coming, 167.5. And I do see the possibility of us coming down all the way down to 166. There is a risk of Apple dropping, so just be careful. It still looks bearish. A pop and drop is a real possibility. So please be careful, guys, with all these different technical updates. I'm going to talk about a couple more tickers and try to be kind of quick with this part. So looking at Rivian, this is showing some strength compared to the market. This, in my opinion, especially thanks to its good news, we have to try to hold above 11.06. We're on a nice uptrend, so if we do hold above this, we could be looking for a push towards this imbalance at 11.34. Rivian could try to bounce here, so look for a little bit more upside, but then watch resistance around 11.28. Watch that very, very carefully. For SoFi has been trying to push. I could see it retesting 7.6. If we break that, we could get closer to 8. If we reject off this, we're going to come down. We're on a slight downtrend on SoFi, so it's still looking kind of weak to me, not the strongest. We got a technical bounce since we hit 7, so it might pop and drop in my opinion, but there is a risk of it coming down lower. For ARM, this is very flat right now. I think it might retest to 137, and it could reject and come back down to 135. It's not looking that strong. But if we hold above 135, we could always bounce after that. So look for a little pop and drop down to 135, then a bounce if that ends up holding. For Super Micro, this is not looking that great. There's a slight bearish divergence, but that's not the only thing. We tried to break above 1150. We failed to get a clean hold above that area since we ended up coming back down. So I think there's a risk of it testing 1052, and we'll see if it bounces or not. But look for a little bit of downside for Super Micro. For Palantir, the 4 hour is showing some weakness. Watch 25.85. If we lose that, 25 is coming. If we hold this, we could bounce, but I think it's going to come down a little bit more, and we'll see if that breaks. I do think it's going to break. For the IWM Russell 2000, there's this gap to fill down here. The gap is right here towards this 203 area. My guts tells me that if we lose 204.76, we're going to be coming down to 203, and there's a risk of that coming down, in my opinion. Why do I say that? There's also like a head and shoulders like structure on the Russell 2000, so there's a risk of us coming down to 203, so watch for that very carefully. For, let's see what else is there. Microsoft, in my opinion, is showing some weakness. Watch the 200 EMA on the 4 hour time frame at 400.96 to 400. If we lose that, 397 is coming. That's the daily 50 EMA. And if that fails us, a big drop is coming towards 392. So watch 400, 397, and then 392. There's a good chance it's going to come down lower, but watch and see if we get that break for confirmation. It does look a bit more bearish. AMD, we have a doji forming on the daily. It may pop again towards like 212, but then come back down towards the gap fill. I think it's going to likely come down for that gap fill, may pop and then drop. We have a head and shoulders like structure. We do have this little pop right here, so it's not as valid. But like I said before, be a little bit careful with it because I still see a risk of it testing 208 and eventually coming down to that gap fill for 205. So I do see this potentially playing out, a little drop coming to AMD, so be a little bit careful. For SPX, just like SPY, I'm seeing something very similar. I'm going to actually zoom out a little bit more. But we have this gap to fill all the way down to basically 50, 80. So if that ends up, getting filled, that's going to be a little bearish, and there is a risk of this happening to SPX, which will dictate SPY. For the VIX is starting a potential uptrend. It's making higher highs and higher lows. And we have this gap to fill up here at 15.4. So it makes me think that whether this thing comes down or not doesn't matter. It might eventually push higher, which means the market may have eventual downside. For the dollar index, it's still actually moving with the market, not really moving like it normally does. But we'll see if we get a bounce off 103 or not. For Coinbase, we look bullish right now on Coinbase. There's no sign of this thing breaking down yet. It's on a nice uptrend. If we break 240, watch 244 and eventually 250. But the chart is still looking bullish to me. It could still push higher. There's no sign of this breaking down yet, so it may outperform SPY, Tesla, in the market. Google's looking kind of weak. I could see this thing actually sinking towards 131 all over again, but it's trying to base around there. So 130 to 131 may be tested. It may pop and then drop, and we'll see what it does after that. For Amazon, this looks kind of bearish. I think 171 is coming. Could retest 174, then make its way down to 171. Look for some downside just to be safe. Meta is no different. It's starting to turn on the 4 hour, but watch support at 494. If we lose that, a bigger drop is going to be coming towards, in my opinion, 490. 490 is going to be coming if we lose 494. We're going to test this. There's a chance it might lose it, so be careful. I do favor that somewhat more. All right, guys, I'm sorry to say this, but Tesla's looking bearish to me. It's looking very weak. There's no sign of a nice bounce, and we're getting bad news after bad news after bad news. It's what the media likes, and it's working in their favor as they get more clicks and views. With that being said, it is what it is, guys. The long term for Tesla is still very bright as it is for Apple, NVIDIA, and the overall market. But for the short term, a lot of stocks are showing some weakness, and there's a risk of some downside. Powell is going to speak tomorrow. There could be some pops here and there, but ultimately, I do see a risk of some downside. So be careful, guys, and do what you have to do. Thank you for listening. Have a great day, and I'll see you guys very soon on the next one. Thank you. Market to the moon alongside Tesla. I want to remind you the long term is still bright for it despite what we're seeing right now. So be calm, be collected, and I'll see you guys once again tomorrow morning before the market opens. Thank you, and peace out.